The idea of scrutability reminds of the very controversial thesis of knowability, a thesis which is often identified as a form of verification and challenged by the so-called Fitch paradox. The knowability thesis states in its canonical formulation that every truth is knowable, whereas the scrutability thesis states that every truth is knowable from knowledge of a certain base of truth. If we allow, as you do, the possibility of idealized thinkers who are in a position to know the base truth, in what respect your scrutability thesis does collapse into a form of knowability thesis?
Fitch, in a paper in the 1940s, came up with this famous paradox of a statement which seems to be true but not knowable, and arguing against people, including some of the logical empiricists who thought that all truths were knowable. In his case was, well, all we need is one truth which is not actually known, let's call it P. Then the following seems to be a truth. P and it's not known that P. And let's say that P is not ever known. So P and it's not ever known that P, as a matter of fact. Now it looks like that's a truth that nobody could ever know. Because to know it, we'd have to know the P. If we knew the P, it would be false. False truths can't be known. So it looks like this is a matter of logic. This truth cannot be known by anybody. The scrutability thesis is a cousin of the knowability thesis, so one might think it was vulnerable to similar worries. As you say, if it turned out that PQTI, the scrutability base, was knowable, and we could do all the a priori intelligence from there, you might think we could use this to know all truths about the world. I think the moral of this is that actually PQTI itself is not in fact knowable. There's only one, PQTI itself is only true in one world. Roughly the world exactly as, actually the actual world. And let's suppose in the actual world nobody knows PQTI. Nobody even believes it, I think. Probably nobody even entertains it. So in a world where somebody were to believe PQTI, it would have to be very different from our world. It would have to be a different world. And that would thereby be a world where PQTI is false. So what that suggests is our specific truth, PQTI, can never in fact be known. PQTI is a bit like the Fitch truth. It's kind of the hypothesis that it's known, at least of these paradoxes. Maybe there's some other world where somebody does engage all this in all this investigation and come to know the fundamental truths about their world, PQTI style, but that would be a very different world. And maybe, who's to say in that world, maybe there's no truth that is unknown. So Fitch's paradox is in fact avoided in that world.
That seems to be the moral of Fitch paradox. On the other hand, the level of idealization that you built into the book for this ideal reasoner makes think that you have in the book you have this vivid representation of the level of idealization by means of the cosmos. Maybe you can tell us something about this very powerful machinery. And the idea is that if an ideal reasoner can use this cosmoscope, he might be in a position to know the truth of the base. So I think there is a tension between the idealization that you built in order to justify the scrutability thesis, and then the moral of the Fitch paradox. So anyway, if you can tell us something, people are listening to the interview about the cosmoscope, so this gives an idea of what are these ideal reasoners that are needed for the scrutability.
Okay, why don't I first say something about the cosmoscope and then talk about the idealization, because this device, the cosmoscope, plays a very central role, plays a fairly central role in at least arguing for the scrutability thesis from PQTI. So the cosmoscope, as I think about it, is a kind of virtual reality device for processing the information in PQTI. It works a little bit like, I think about it, it's a bit like Google Maps or Google Earth. You focus in on a bit of the Earth and see what's going on. This is Google Universe, Google Cosmos. You can focus in on any bit of the universe and see what's going on there. Roughly, it gives you a kind of geometric display of all the information in P, the physical truths about the world at all scales. You can zoom in, you can zoom out on the galaxy, on the subatomic level. It also gives you phenomenological displays of anyone's consciousness, some kind of by recreating them in the user's imagination. perhaps. Tells me what your consciousness is like, your consciousness, so on. It tells me you are here. It's the you are here marker. It also has the ability to do counterfactual simulation. If the physics had been different, here's how things would have evolved, here's how phenomenology would have evolved. And I think it's clear with a cosmoscope, somebody using a cosmoscope would come to know a whole lot. If I want to know whether Italy's going to win the World Cup next year, well, I can peer into the cosmoscope to find out. Take a look. Look around the football stadiums in Brazil, and see what goes on. I'll eventually figure out, does Italy win the World Cup or not? So using the cosmoscope, you can come to know a lot. Maybe even you could come to know everything, or everything in a very broad domain. But the cosmoscope is just a device for processing information in PQTI. It helps to make vivid what we could know on the basis of PQTI. So I think if you can know all this stuff using a cosmoscope, you can also come to know it using PQTI. And this is a way of, this accomplishes two things in my argumentative purposes. One, it just makes vivid what's involved in how much knowledge PQTI would give you everything that a cosmoscope could give you, which is a lot. Second, I mean, it is true that a big idealization is involved in my thesis. I mean, Laplace, this goes back to Laplace. Laplace, in articulating Laplace's demon, says if there were a vast enough intellect to know all these truths about all the fundamental entities in the universe, and to submit this to analysis, then it would be uncertain of nothing. Clearly, this requires reasoning capacities far beyond ours. Likewise, for anyone to know PQTI would require reasoning capacities far beyond ours. And officially, my thesis does involve ideal reasoning of that kind. All truths are scrutable from PQTI on the basis of ideal reasoning. But one thing the cosmoscope helps us to do is to offload at least some of that idealization into the world by taking this machine, the cosmoscope that stores the information in PQTI. So I don't need to hold all of it in my head at once. And this makes us be able to think of all. And the thought is the following: if an ordinary reasoner like me could come to know a truth with the aid of a cosmoscope, then an ideal reasoner could come to know it just using PQTI without the aid of a cosmoscope. So the cosmoscope is a way of somehow at least offloading the idealization into the world and making it a bit easier for us to get a grip on what the idealization involves. The other question you asked was about, if you really had access to a cosmoscope, couldn't you figure out the base truths? Well, this is a subtle matter, but it's tied to the way that scrutability is formulated. I take it that in our world, at least so far, there's no cosmoscope. And let's say nobody ever invents a cosmoscope. Maybe cosmoscopes violate the laws of nature. They're actually impossible given our laws of physics. So PQTI for our world is incompatible with a cosmoscope. So if I was to get a cosmoscope, I'd have to be in a world where PQTI is false. It would be a different world. So there's different ways you can think about this. One is, well, if you think about the cosmoscope as always looking out at its own world, then if we go to a world where we have a cosmoscope, it'll have to be a world not with PQTI, but with some different things. PQTI stars, let's say, some different laws of physics. I actually prefer to think about the cosmoscope as working in conditional mode. In a way, the cosmoscope can be sitting in a world distinct from ours, but contemplating our world from the outside. And the ideal reasoner in the cosmoscope world is given the hypothesis that PQTI is true, as a supposition that is asked, given that supposition, who's going to win the World Cup next year? Or some other question like this. And they say, well, supposing it's like this, and can you look in the cosmoscope and find out who wins the World Cup next year? And yeah, they can do that. Now, as a matter of fact, in their world, PQTI would be false, because the cosmoscope is a world. The cosmoscope world, the PQTI world is a world without cosmoscopes. So they can't use the cosmoscope to come to know the base truths about their world. They can only come to know the base truths about our world. And in this way, I think we avoid this. So this is consistent with the point I was making about Fitch's paradox, that nobody in any of these worlds ends up knowing PQTI. The ones who live in the PQTI world never even entertain it. The ones in the other worlds who entertain PQTI are living in a world where it's false.